Hey everybody, welcome to another Duel Academy video. This time we're going to be talking about competitive deck building. This video is kind of a response to one of our viewers, Anthony, who had some questions about it based off the last video we did about activation timings. And he just kind of wanted to know how competitive players build their decks, how they decide what to tack into their decks and things like that. And so I brought Ryi back in here to talk about it. Ryi, so when you're building a deck for a tournament, it's a lot different than building a deck for the ladder, right?
Yeah, I mean, so in ladder, you only face your opponent once, and it's a win-lose situation. In most competitive tournaments, everyone kind of has the same set rule: best of threes with a 6-card side deck. Those are the official Konami rules that they put in place. So there's, I would say, quite a bit of skill that goes into building your deck and your side deck. And most people that are successful in these competitive tournaments, they have a good side deck. That's just what it comes down to.
So the side deck, that's something that you have that you can choose cards from to kind of alter your main deck.
Correct. So in a best of three, that means you have to win 2 out of 3 duels with your opponent in order to advance. And in games 2 and 3, you are allowed to go into your side deck and change cards in your main deck in between those matches, having to go back to your original deck for game 1 every single time.
Okay. So you would put cards in there that would be specific to a deck you think you might face.
Exactly. And kind of to go more in depth with that, kind of to understand how to deck build, the very first thing you have to know is the idea of core cards within your deck and how that impacts your main deck. So I actually have 2 examples here. My first
Yeah.
one is Shiranui. Shiranui, when you look at the cards that you have to play in order to play the core the core build of Shiranui is basically this. It's 9 cards. Sure, there might be some different ratios here or there, 9 to 10 playable cards, but everything else is not really Shiranui related. So you can kind of put in whatever you want. This is amazing for a tournament deck because that means slots 10 through 20 or 10 through 30, whatever you decide to do, can be whatever you want. It doesn't affect your core value.
So
Where if you look at it, oh, sorry, go ahead.
oh, so by core you mean that's what the deck needs to function,
Pretty
correct?
much.
Okay.
This is what's differentiating this deck between you playing like a dark, like you won't see a random Dark Lord card in here, right? Because that just makes no sense. The archetype Shiranui.
Right. Okay.
So comparing that to something like Dark Magician, to play Dark Magician, even at its most minimalistic values, you pretty much have to play this version of the deck. You need your 3 circle, you need your 3 navigation, you need your 3 Dark Magician, you need your 3 rods with your illusion to search your Dark Magicians and your Dark Illusionist guy as well. If you deviate from this build, it's you're gonna be cut in consistency. You're gonna be cut in how many Dark Magicians you can actually summon. There's always downsides to hitting your core cards essentially. So that just makes the space to run tech cards in Dark Magician significantly smaller. So if you did 10 to 20 in Shiranui, you only have 5 to 20 in Dark Magician. And that's
So
kind of the idea behind core cards.
so a deck with a smaller core, is that necessarily a better deck?
It depends on the meta. Obviously, if the core cards just do a whole bunch of different things, for example, in Subterror, all the Subterror card effects just do all sorts of crazy effects. If all of those effects just fit the meta perfectly, making that a tier 1 deck, it doesn't necessarily mean that a deck with more tech space is going to be better, but it does mean that a deck with more tech space, such as Shiranui, has a higher chance of countering those other decks and adapting to metas.
Okay.
That's why like a deck like Dark Magician will fluctuate rapidly between tier 1, tier 3, off the meta, back to tier 1, where if you look at a deck like Shiranui, they've consistently been in that tier 2, tier 1 position.
Just because they naturally have more room to adapt, whereas Dark Magician just kind of it does what it does, and
Correct.
either
More
it's going to work
adaptability.
or
Yeah.
it's not.
Right.
Okay.
So when you're thinking about your main deck and your side deck, a couple things to think about. Again, the rules are that when you side deck, you have 6-card side deck. 1 can be a skill instead of the card if you want to do that instead. And the only real rule is the amount of cards in your main deck have to still balance out by the end of the side decking process.
So if you start with 20, you have to end with 20. You can't have 21. You can't have 22.
Exactly. And that is actually where sometimes you'll see them play 21, maybe even potentially 22 cards when they enter tournaments. That's because they're very desperate for the one extra tech slot, allowing them to go into their extra deck more in order to do that. That's why sometimes you'll see, for example, Element Saber does this a lot. Element Sabers, they play around 22 to 24 cards right now.
Right.
That deck is able to search very, very well. Palace, the Element Saber, that lets them search so all their monsters besides Alistair the Invoker. And then when you draw Alistair the Invoker, you basically also draw your invocation on top of that as well.
Okay.
So combining that consistency with having more space to side deck, they don't mind going over that 20 card kind of minimum that a lot of people like playing in.
Because they know they can get what they need anyways. They don't have to hard draw into it. They can kind of search for it.
Yeah. So, in the same scenario, like every deck's going to be a little bit different. Decks that play baggy sleeves, for example, and they're drawing 2 cards per turn, they don't care going over 20 either because they're drawing 2 cards per turn. So they're able to kind of stall the game out and draw what they need in order to get into their tech cards.
All right. So we keep bringing up tech cards, and one of the questions that Anthony had was, how do you interpret the current meta and then try to figure out what the most effective tech cards are? And the example he gave was Canada versus Floodgate.
Sure. So when you're going into your side deck, right, you want the very first question that you want to ask yourself is what popular decks counter my deck? And based on that kind of response that you give yourself, that's what your side deck is going to pretty much look like. So, for example, if we go into the Dark Magicians, they're going to be scared of anything that makes other monsters untargetable, anything that will blow away their dark magical circles, cosmic cyclones, for example. So fantastic side deck cards, Lancia. Lancia prevents banishing. So you prevent them from banishing your dark magical circle. Amazing. You can put that in the main deck as one of your tech slots, or you can put it in the side deck if you don't want to really put it in your main deck because you're not confident that it can cover that many decks in the main deck.
Or like Luna Lights, their boss monster says cannot be targeted.
Exactly, yeah. So against Luna Lights, you might want to bring Sphere Karibo to put them into defense mode so you have an easier time swinging over them. That's kind of like what you're thinking when you're making a side deck. In terms of knowing what the meta is, that's just something you gain from playing a lot, from reading tier lists, from watching videos, from watching tournaments, and kind of absorbing the meta within yourself, and then kind of deciding what your side deck is going to be at that point.
Right. What do I keep losing to? Right.
Exactly. Yeah. So if you see, for example, Stromberg does super, super well, but then they immediately lose because they're getting hit by all this back row removal. Well, is there a way to counter that? And if there is a way to counter that, the deck will immediately be better. But if there isn't, it's just going to stay where it is, essentially.
Okay.
So,
go ahead.
I was going to say, and then, once you kind of put what counters your deck kind of in the side, then it's just making sure that you have good coverage. So this is, again, where kind of deck size comes into play. Dark Magician versus Shiranui. Dark Magician has a lot more space to main deck these techs, such as Cosmic Cyclone, such as Treacherous Trap Hole, etc., etc. And then having all those cards be, when you're side decking, you have more options to side deck out. You're not going to go in Dark Magician and say, I'm going to side out my circle. That'd be ridiculous, right?
Right.
Where Shiranui, they have, so many tech spots that they can literally just sub any tech for any tech that they want. And that's kind of the power in side decking when it comes to that. So a deck that has more availability for coverage is going to be, if like Shiranui, you want more like a spread out side deck. So you want to counter as many decks as possible, where a deck that has more linear, not as much spots, you want them to focus on a couple of decks that you think you'll have trouble kind of getting through. That's what your side deck is going to kind of look like.
Right, so you want to see what your deck's strengths are, be like, all right, maybe I can't counter everything, but I can counter my most problematic deck.
Exactly, and that's for a deck specifically where the core cards just take over your entire deck, and you don't have that much space to side.
Like Dark Magician might just choose 1 or 2 decks to side against, where Shiranui's like, I can counter everything. I got enough room.
Yeah, pretty much like Shiranui. They can just play 2, 2, and 2. 3 different cards at 2 each, and they just counter all of that. Where Dark Magician might just want to play 3 and 3, for example.
Right.
Because if you play like 2, 2, and 2, you might kind of have to kind of just rely on drawing a card, which is never the position you want to be in, right?
No.
You always want to try and stack your deck or search your deck or
Yeah.
whatever the case may be.
Another question that came in was, some decks are able to run a 20 card version, and then some decks are able to run a 30 card version. What factors come into play there? Because we've seen Shiranui at 20 cards, and we've seen Shiranui at 30 cards. Kind of same thing with Thunder Dragons.
Yeah, so that all comes down to kind of consistency. Consistency is key. So like we said earlier, Element Saber, they're able to search so many of their cards. So they're able to go into that 22, 24 card range to have more tech slots available to them if they wanted to do that. And then you have decks like Thunder Dragons that can abuse Baggy Sleeves incredibly easily. Just destroy a level 5 monster by battle. You get to draw 2 cards instead of 1 during your draw phase. And then they play just a load of hand traps and searches, and so they're very consistent even at that 30 card level. Same with Crystron's, a lot of searching potential, a lot of, we're just getting stuff into the graveyard and then using that as material. Also, you have, for example, Thunder Dragons and Monarchs and these decks, Light Sworns, decks that kind of mill, have become popular as well. So playing a 30 card version of the deck, as long as you draw cards that can mill you, you're going to be good. So as long as you're able to stay consistent and you're able to draw cards, search cards, mill cards, go through your deck rapidly, it's okay to play more than 20 cards.
Well, because back in the day when Duel Links first came out, everything was a hard draw. There wasn't a lot of searching. There wasn't a lot of draw power. So you wanted to keep it down to 20 cards. But now we can get through our decks a lot faster, so it's not such an issue. Okay, another question that came in was, under what situations would you side in and out, like Wall of Disruption versus Mirror Wall, things like that, battle traps?
Sure. So battle traps are interesting when there isn't a lot of back row removal. They're very powerful because you're essentially forcing your opponent to swing into them. Between Wall of D and Mirror Wall specifically, Wall of D is something that you have to do on attack declaration. So, for example, Dark Magician can navigate it or can negate it with Magician's Navigation. However, Mirror Walls and cards like that can be used in the damage step, which means that the only things that can be used in the damage step are things that affect monsters' attack and defense. So you actually cannot negate a Mirror Wall activation in the damage step.
Right.
You'd have to use something like a Legacy Clash or something
So
like that.
make sure to activate it in the damage step.
Yeah, make sure you're activating in damage step.
Always know what the latest phase or step that you can activate something is.
Correct. And I think I actually didn't answer the Canadia versus Floodgate question.
Oh, yeah. We can jump right back to that.
We can jump to that one.
Yeah.
So originally when Canadia was super strong, it's because you were able to control when you were able to flip that monster down, where Floodgate, you have to use it on summon, and like I showed in the video earlier, you can actually dodge it, which you can't dodge Canadia. That's just going to happen whenever they want it to. The thing is, though, Canadia targets, and Floodgate does not target. So when cards like Casitas came out, and things like the Saber Dancer that you were talking about earlier, with those cards existing, it's very difficult to justify having a Canadia over a Floodgate. But now, funny enough, it's starting to shift again, where you have the new Chaos Dragon Leve in Thunder Dragons, for example, and just in general, people playing more Monarchs, more Thunder Dragons, more levels 7 synchros out of the Lightsworn engine, a lot more Black Rose Dragon. Fiendish Chain is now slowly taking the spot of Floodgate. It targets, but it also stops on summon effects, which is something Floodgate cannot do. So it's just kind of an ever-moving meta. You just have to look at what the powerful, threatening cards are, right? Like, I'm sure everyone's been in that situation. Element Saber, they're losing, they summon Cositis, and that's it. You don't have an out, and you lose to them. Those big problematic cards are kind of deciding the back row in a competitive tournament.
That could be a perfect example of a side decking situation, right? You might go in maining your Canadias, and then you might have a Floodgate in your side deck.
Exactly. You would switch out the type of tech that you have in order to.
So it's like, oh, I'm playing against Luna Lights. My Canadias aren't going to work. I'm going to throw my Floodgates.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. So I think that's about going to wrap it up here. I think we got through a lot of stuff. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Of course, put in the comments if you want us to talk about anything else. We love doing these videos, and we love to do some more viewer requests. So If you like what you see, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, follow us on Twitch, follow us on Twitter. We got a Discord. Make sure to check that out. And we'll see you next time here in Duel Academy.
Bye, YouTube.
Bye. See you next time.